Fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by TC and Friends Monday Night Musings. Tonight's episode is going to be very interesting. So I'm going to get everything out of the way while we wait for the guest of honor to show up, Jacob from Biblical Anarchy. I'm going to be working to bring him on for an episode of Libertarian Lowdown, but tonight we're going to be approaching the conversation as it relates to world events, as it regards the modern Western Church and Israel, and how we are to approach Israel, what it means to be Israel today, what geopolitical Israel is, what geopolitical Israel means to Christians, what geopolitical Israel should or should not mean to Christians, and I brought Jacob on because he has a very interesting approach to these things, and it's countercultural to most evangelicals in the U.S., even non-dispensationalists, and we'll cover some of that as we're coming up. So if you're at all interested in what I do here, and you like the content, and you like the conversations that take place, please head over to my Subscribe Star, pick a level of support there. I would be very thankful. And I am actually working, and I've said this 1,000 times before, but I am actually working on bringing Subscribe Star only content up for you guys to be able to watch and enjoy and take part in. With that, one of the first ones that I'm going to be putting up is a conversation that I had with a gentleman who was going to head off to Ukraine to join the Ukrainian military in their fight against Russia. And another one that I'm going to be bringing up is a conversation that I had with a Rochester, Minnesota Police Department sergeant when I was talking about bringing charges against a university president who physically aggressed me. And then another one will be a behind-the-scenes conversation with someone in the media sphere, so we say a reporter, and that will be only behind the paywall. So, and if you'd like to help, besides Subscribestar, if you're not a monthly subscriber type person and you'd like to continue to do something, there's a super chat option here in the videos. So especially if you want your comment or your question to be seen and asked or answered, hit that super chat option and share this out, like the video, drive me up in that algorithm, because the algorithm doesn't like me. Even though I have 3,000 and some subscribers, sometimes I'm lucky if I get 25 to 50 views on videos, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. That's not, my buddy Kevin is sitting off screen. He's going to be coming in. He's kind of a math guy. He's good at that kind of stuff, and I don't know what the percentage is, but as I'm bringing it up, I can guarantee you he's thinking about it in his head. But that's a very small percentage of what my total number of subscribers are. And then I look at my subscriber count and the number of views, and most of my views are coming from people who aren't subscribers. So let's work on that, folks. Let's get this out so that my subscribers and non-subscribers alike can partake of the wisdom of the people that I bring on my show, on my platform. It's all about them. It's not about me at all, really. And hey, Tomsky and Sarah, thanks for being here. By the way, Tomsky's a big supporter out of Great Britain, and he will be an interesting person to interact with throughout this stream, because Tomsky is not a Christian. The last I knew. Maybe he's changed. I don't know. And maybe the world's gotten to him and roles are reversed. I don't know. Well, we've got the coffee. We've got merchandise. All of this can be yours for the low, low price of just sending me an email at mbrrpodcast@yahoo.com and asking me how much it'll cost you. And then we can go from there. Tomsky is my token atheist. Yes, indeed, he is. So while we're getting ready to bring Jacob on. Kevin, hello, sir. Oh, hold on. I had you muted, which I'm sure is you're probably used to. So yeah, there you are. Kevin, thanks for doing this tonight. I know you were looking forward to it.
Thank you, brother. TC, good to see you.
Like, he even remembered to call me by my screen name. Right.
Yeah,
So,
I know you as Todd. Sorry for
and now you ruined me. Now I'm doxxed. I am
yeah,
completely doxxed. And
but we have known each other a minute or so, I think.
yeah, longer than anybody else. So, uh, longer than anybody who watches my channel, probably.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
save for a few of the hangers on from my old career who I still hear from once in a while. Hey, man, I've been watching your stuff. So,
And you
I
let
know
me
that
on here
you,
one other time, so I'm grateful to be
yeah,
back again.
which was actually a well received show. And
Good.
I don't know. I don't know how that situation ever ended up, but I know you've got an appearance coming up yourself with a friend of mine
Mhm.
on Noggin Notes with Jake Whiskerchin. You're going to be
Yes.
talking about your experience with cluster B personality disorder, and not personally, not that I'm aware of,
Yeah.
but your own battle with people who definitely portray the traits of cluster B personality disorder and how it has impacted your church experience. And I know you're recording that with Jake tomorrow, and that'll be out on Noggin Notes. Well, the way Jake works, in like 6 weeks. So,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to Jake. We've had some nice back and forth, looking to discuss whether it's my favorite topic or not. I couldn't tell you, but it is a topic I'm very familiar with, which is spiritual abuse, authoritarianism, as all that relates to the psychological definition, cluster B, as you called it, narcissism, and things like that that people have heard of. So, yeah, should be fun.
yeah, and just so everybody knows, I brought Kevin on tonight in particular because he has a keen interest in the topic of Israel, but also so I'm not the only old person on the show this time. So,
I did just roll the clock another year, you know.
yeah, what do you're at what, 54 now?
Yeah, almost
Almost
58.
50. Oh, 50. He's right. But anyway, without any further ado, we're going to bring on our esteemed guest from Biblical Anarchy. Jacob, thank you for doing this tonight. I really appreciate it. And tell us a little bit about yourself so that we can roll into the topic that really kind of connected us, which is some of your commentary on different threads throughout the Twitter sphere. What do we even call it anymore, Jacob? I don't know. But tell us a little bit about yourself and tease everybody, because I'd like to bring you back on for an episode of Libertarian Lowdown where we could talk a little bit more about your libertarian perspective and what biblical anarchy is in your eyes.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. So, my name is Jacob Winograd. I am the host of the Biblical Anarchy Podcast with the Libertarian Christian Institute, part of our Christians for Liberty podcast network. And so, yeah, I started podcasting actually solo back in like late 2020. I had a journey where I went from the political left to libertarianism and then eventually anarcho-capitalism. And when the lockdowns happened, I was discouraged to see a lot of churches who were either A, kind of following, suit with the lockdowns, enforcing them on their own churches and congregations, which I felt like, it's very dangerous, first of all, to cede that kind of power to the state. And second of all, I felt like it was contrary to what the Bible teaches us, that we, may sometimes be called to submit to governing authorities when they ask us to do things that we don't agree with, but that, if they ask us to do things that are contrary to the Word of God, we should pause at least and think. And the Bible says, "Do not forsake the gathering of believers," and we're supposed to be a beacon of light, beacon of worship to God and to the to preach the gospel. And if the government tells us not to do that, there's no legitimate role for the government to do that, in my opinion. So between that and just also kind of feeling like I could bridge the gap between the Christian faith and libertarian political ideas. I started podcasting to try to make that argument to my fellow Christians, and then a couple years into that, was approached by the Libertarian Christian Institute, and they picked up my podcast when they started to expand to create the Christians for Liberty Network. And so, yeah, my podcast, I talk about the case for a free society from a biblical perspective, and I go all the way. We skip straight past minarchy and go straight to full anarchy or anarcho-capitalism, voluntarism, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I try to make the case that if we take the teachings of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the biblical scriptures seriously, that we will come to conclusions based on the Bible that match up with the conclusions that we see in libertarian political theory. So,
you mean anarchy is not just like mass chaos, dogs and cats living together and... for those of you that don't get it, that's a reference to Ghostbusters. But so it's funny you bring up, because Kevin is a dear friend. We've been friends for quite a while, and that's one of the things that I've talked about with him is how disappointed I was in churches. And like Kevin and I come from a very reformed perspective, and I don't know personally, you've been very good about not coming down on one side or the other. I know that you've had a lot of conversations with a broad spectrum of people within Christianity on your platform. But you've done better than I do, which is I pretty much don't care who I offend anymore. And Kevin's much more tempered in a good way. He's good for me, and he reminds me an awful lot of you. Which is why I plugged him into your show. As soon as I discovered you, Kevin can attest to the fact that I said, hey, you got to check this guy out. But you guys have a very, very much a mutual approach, or a similar approach to how you approach people, whereas I'm a little bit more of a firebrand and always have been. But I was very angry when I watched even Reformed, like Presbyterian or Calvinistic Baptist churches, kind of all cave, all cave. And in the churches that didn't cave, in my book, like what's his name, the biblical, the Holy Spirit bartender guy down in Florida who refused to follow, is it Harry Brown, refused to follow government orders to keep his church shut down, and they arrested him. They showed up at his house and arrested him, and I'm going, folks,
yeah.
If this is the guy that's leading the charge, and the Presbyterians and the conservative Lutherans and whatnot are caving in, and then we've got a problem, a big problem, especially when you look at, how do I say it? Say this very carefully.
Now you're worried about offending people?
No, I'm not worried about offending people. I want to make sure I don't disparage someone for no reason. Early days of the church, they used to go to leper colonies.
Yep.
And cure people, and not care. And now a virus comes along, and we're going to not even meet in our own buildings. And that, to me, really kind of threw me off. So it was that's why I want to have you on for Libertarian Lowdown. But we connected because you were interacting with a various number of threads throughout the Twitter sphere or X sphere or whatever, with people who were very up in arms, if you will, over the attack on Israel on October 7th and the Israeli response and the American church's response to that. And tell me a little bit of where your mind was on October 7th. And Kevin, feel free to interject here if you have a question or something you want to say, but tell us where your mindset was on that and how you were seeing, right of center and even libertarian people respond to that situation.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a very mixed background. So my my dad's side of the family is entirely Jewish. Now, my dad converted to Judaism converted to Christianity from Judaism as a child when my grandmother did. But the rest of my family on my dad's side is very Jewish, and so I grew up kind of in a very Zionistic worldview because my dad was very connected to his Jewish roots, but then as an adult, I have become more, and even though, and you mentioned earlier, I don't pick sides. I mean, I think when people ask me, I do identify as being more of a, in the Reformed camp, but I do try to appeal to kind of like that. I like that C.S. Lewis label, the mere Christianity. I've always tried to make my podcast, approachable to Christians from different theological walks, and but I definitely myself have a Reformed perspective. So I have a lot of different theological, things that I've gone through in my life that come into play when I'm evaluating this. But yeah, as far as my personal, where I was on October 7th and what I mean, it was, I was already in the mode to start like shouting down people. It'd be like, no escalation, no war with Iran. Like I've been around this long enough to know what was going to come. And as horrified as I was at the loss of innocent life that was, that the Hamas terrorists are responsible for, I just immediately knew, like, yeah, this isn't going, this is, we're going to be circling the wagons again. And, we've already been, as libertarians and anti-war activists doing this with the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. Now we're going to be doing it on two fronts. And at least with the Russia-Ukraine stuff, I knew that a lot of right-wingers had been more anti-war and more unwilling to buy into war propaganda and saber-rattling than they had in the past. But I just know with Israel, that dynamic completely changes, especially for a lot of conservative evangelicals, which is, my people. And so I immediately began thinking about how to approach this subject. It was funny. I had because I kind of produce my podcast, and I'll have, generally speaking, about like, I'll be 3 episodes out. So like this week I'm recording stuff that won't come out for another few weeks, but I instantly realized, man, my next like 3 to 4 episodes are just like not at all going to be relevant to what's going on now. So I quickly reshuffled things and
you're trying to be evergreen.
Yeah, well, it's like it's a good. I try to have a mixture, right? You like to have stuff that's relevant and stuff that's evergreen. But I thought, man, it's important. It was important to me that as quickly as I could, and as quickly as I could rally others to, I wanted to get out in front of this because, again, it's not out of a callousness for the loss of life that happened on October 7th. If anything, it's because I don't want their lives to be minimized because, that the tragedy of their victimhood is then used to justify what has happened now. We've seen now that, the innocent loss of life on the other side has now, I think, tripled and maybe close to quadrupled the loss of life that's happened on October 7th. And listen, I'm connected very much to my Jewish roots. I remember as a kid I took a Holocaust studies class in high school, and like we watched Schindler's List, which I watched that for the first time when I was 16, and it was very emotional for me. I remember going to the Holocaust Museum, finding my, some of my, the family, like my specific name, Winograd, wasn't on there, but, my, like the maiden names of like my grandmother and my grandfather, I was able to see those, when I was looking there. Don't know if they're direct relatives or not, but it's just, I have a connection to that, and I understand the Jewish mindset and the anti-Holocaust mindset and that mantra, never again. But see, when I hear that and I say never again, it's like, okay, that's not just about the Jewish people. Like, to me, I say never again. I've always thought we can't allow this sort of catastrophe to happen again, where we just let governments, where we just let these evil regimes and dehumanization of groups of people run amok and lead to, just untold human suffering and loss of life. And that's partly what motivated me to become anti-war in the first place. And even when I was on the left, because I was probably more of a, depending on what age I was center left, or at times even edging on like democratic socialist, kind of like a Bernie Sanders leftist. But I was always anti-war from a very young age. I remember discovering a lot of the talking points you'll hear people like Scott Horton and others use about, like, hey, 9/11 was blowback for what America did in the 80s and 90s. I discovered that when I was in high school from my very left-leaning history teacher. So I've always been incredibly anti-war, and it's partly motivated by that mindset of never again. That shouldn't just apply to the Jewish people. It should be, we should, especially as Christians, be speaking out against these things. And so that's kind of, from October 7th on, I switched gears and said, we need to, and I think I've seen this, what's different about now versus past events is I think that you do see this. There is a more present dissident voice against the war machine now than you've seen in instances in the past. And so, although I'm still very worried about what's going on, I am encouraged that I think the anti-war voice is louder than it's been in the past.
So, Kevin, I want to bring you in here a little bit, because you and I didn't really talk too much initially about October 7th on that day, but I know you to be a man that's aware of things going on in the world, but your journey to, what's referred to as, kind of an amillennial perspective and a covenantal perspective has been kind of a slow and arduous journey itself. And you and I have found ourselves on opposite ends of the spectrum at some points in your journey. And we have some mutual friends who I, haven't been able to talk to, at all since I got yeeted permanently off of Facebook, but who themselves are journeying away from that kind of that normative typified. And for those of you that are watching that are not into this lingo, you're just going to have to bear with us. That normative typified dispensationalism, which seems to be very pervasive throughout the U.S., even in people who you wouldn't think would share that view. You journeyed away from that yourself in the recent few years, have found yourself struggling with some of those perspectives. What was your mindset on October 7th?
Well,
when the news broke. Don't tell me what you were thinking in the morning. I don't care about that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it's all pretty shocking for most people. I don't even know who would like to see this. I'm sure there's some goofballs, kooks that really enjoy this sort of stuff, but certainly we don't. I can identify with what Jacob said, and I've really moved I've become more libertarian in my thinking. I have certainly become almost anti-war myself. I grew up in a family. My dad was a policeman. He'd served in the military. I mean, I was always in a Republican family, and I'm still mostly Republican, but I have a lot of libertarian leanings. It was a shocking situation, but maybe what continues to surprise me to some degree is how much evangelicalism has, I don't know, hate to say it this way, but they've kind of gone nuts over this situation. Like, this is really, this is it. This is the end times being fulfilled, and the rapture's just around the corner. And, and I grew up in this environment too. I grew up in dispensational churches, even though I didn't know what that was at the time. But, I'd been to the services where the guest preacher comes in with all the end times flow charts and, all this kind of stuff. And, pictures of a lion here and, the lamb here and, the plagues, and you followed this. And I mean, it was just all kind of really crazy stuff. So, I grew up in that. So dispensational postmillennial thought is not strange or new to me. I get it.
I think you meant premillennial.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did I say pre?
Yeah, we know which direction you're leaning because of what you just said. So you meant
Okay.
premillennial
Premillennial
dispensationalism. And for those that don't understand, and I know this seems kind of, it's not off topic, but kind of out of the norm for my normal Monday night show. There's premillennialism, amillennialism, and postmillennialism, and there's only one correct place to land on that: amillennial.
We can make room for like the very soft and reasonable postmillennialists, I think. But yeah,
there we go.
I would tend to be amillennial.
Yeah,
and we don't. I mean, most maybe your viewers don't tune in to listen to this stuff, and so I don't.
But this is really important to the world events right now.
It really is.
Very important.
It really is, because I think I don't know if I'm going to be out of bounds or off course.
Have you watched my show?
Right. But is most of the evangelical world really wrapped? I mean, they're just rushing into this thing headlong. Like, I mean, and it's everybody. It's all over Facebook in terms of the quotes of Israel and all this and that. And we can probably discuss what that means to some degree as we go along. But,
finish your thought, then I'll ask a question.
They're just really caught up in this. Okay. So I don't need to belabor it. Like, this is it. This is the beginning. This is the end
Precisely.
times. This is the 11th hour, right? This is really going, Israel. I mean, it all revolves around what's going on in Israel. And so, this really gets people fired up and really excited. I think I hate it's a kind of a morbid excitement, almost like, hey, we can't wait to be raptured, and leave all you poor slobs here on earth to fend for yourselves. And from a strictly reformed amillennial position, I don't see it that way. And so that kind of puts me at odds with a lot of evangelicals, most evangelicals.
People we're friends with.
Yes.
And I would imagine, absolutely. Jacob, you kind of have that. I heard you on one of your recent broadcasts say kind of the same thing, that you've had some conversations in your own home congregation where you've been able to lay out some of these ideas. So the question that I have for the two of you, collectively, individually, at the same time, is how have your conversations been going as it relates to, eschatological conversations? But are you hearing people in your own congregations or in your own sphere of connections with other Christians who are like almost chomping at the bit, like, this is it? Like, here we are. Are you hearing that? Because I'm hearing that from people in my world. Like, Jesus is coming back. And I'm like, you folks are dangerous. Are you? And that's why they're applauding Israel's response to this, because they feel like this is it. Are you guys running into that?
In my home church, I'm very blessed to be surrounded by, I think, a very probably like 70-80% majority reformed amillennial brothers and sisters in Christ. We do have some dispensationalist types. They haven't been super loud. My conversations have been mostly positive. I think a lot of people are in my church more on board with the covenantal view. A couple of conversations I've had with the dispensationalist types, in terms of people in my own local community, not venturing into the Twitter world just yet. They I wouldn't say that they're frothing at the mouth, but rather what I see is it's just this weird, I don't know, apathy or callousness where they're just like, maybe they're not the most eager, diehard dispensationalists out there. But because they have that framework, they don't find the loss of life going on either side particularly alarming. And if you try to talk to them about, things like, eschatology or, covenant theology, I think, and this is going to sound maybe more, I don't know, disrespectful or flippant.
You'll make
than I
me
mean it to
sound.
be.
You will be fine. Trust me. On my platform, you are going to sound just.
I think it's to some extent a lot of what lends itself towards dispensationalist mindsets is people who just have a more, just a less informed and more shallow view of these things. They haven't studied them. I think it's like if you, and I actually have a podcast episode coming out on this in a couple weeks. It's like if you just really read the Bible, read the New Testament, the Old Testament, read, all the different passages that talk about what the old covenant was. When you read, Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah, foreshadowing the new covenant, and you read how the new covenant's described in passages like Galatians 3 and 4 and in Romans 9, and others, it's just, it doesn't really leave a lot of room, in my opinion, for this weird dispensationalist mindset where it's like it doesn't seem to fit in with what the new covenant was foretold to be.
Right.
B, to me, it undermines this is what I've tried to talk to people. I think, I think the reason why this matters to me is because I have that Reformed perspective. In the same way that I think, like, the doctrines of grace are important and predestination, and that grace is freely given, that matters when we're talking about the cross. This subject also matters because I think a dispensationalist view really actually undermines what Christ did on the cross, makes it less important. It makes it kind of like, oh, that was kind of like a plan B and kind of a workaround, and we're still going to get back at some point here soon to the kingdom of Israel. It's like, wait, so you're saying that everything Jesus did on the cross was just to buy time to restore the kingdom of Israel?
It was literally what you said, which was kind of a secondary plan. Like, oh, I guess the Jews screwed up, so I guess we're gonna go to the Gentiles now, and that's exactly how it plays out. Kevin, you kind of, you're currently, we're in the presence of theological greatness. Kevin is a theology student through. He was in seminary. I don't know. Are you still doing seminary? I know. Yeah. Kevin's doing seminary. So we are in the presence of theological greatness.
Well, let's not get carried away there, but thank you, brother.
So you have studied this out because of your schooling.
Yeah, I am a graduate of the Reformed Baptist Seminary, and I am a current student at the Reformed Baptist Seminary. So it is a 1689
nice
confessional school, fully Reformed, covenantal, and it's a great school. I'm really grateful to go there.
But they have patently rejected Darbyism.
Oh, 100%. Yes, it is fully covenantal. But I was just thinking, I was reading this morning in my personal study. I've been going through the book of Hebrews in one section, and I was just, I can't stop reading like chapters 9 and 10. I just keep studying them over and over again. And the language being used by the writer here is so covenantal. It is so against dispensationalism. It really is quite shocking. And I mean, just the Old Testament quotations, like here it says, this is the covenant that I will make with them. And I circled the word them. Who's them? Is this an ethnic group? Because this whole thing carries a bunch of typology and shadows. It talks about types and the shadows. And then it said, after these days, declares the Lord, I will put my laws on their hearts and write them on their minds. Yep. So then now you have this group that is going to, he's talking about regeneration, right? The saved person. And this is not a singular group of people. This is God's people. This is God's covenant people, because the whole thing leading up to this is about, this is a new covenant that I will make with you. So, Jacob, I think you hit it pretty well. There is some weird shallowness to it, but although, like, I know so many dispensationalists who are incredibly intelligent, incredibly well studied, and I don't understand how they get there, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. There's a small contingent within dispensationalist theology where some of them are intelligent, and then there's a lot of people who just follow what those people say, and they don't investigate it for themselves. But the intelligent dispensationalists, it's hard to speculate, right? But sometimes, you know how there's that saying that sometimes like a smart person is easier to fool than a dumb person, and sometimes these dispensationalists who are well read, I feel like they're almost constructing this super complicated worldview with all these arguments, and it's like the meme with the I don't know what show it's from because I haven't watched it, but the guy in front of the board with like the red strings all behind him going, and like that's what, like those people, it's like they're connecting verses in a very haphazard, disjointed way, and in a way that, like, okay, but if you read those passages in their context, they don't really say the things that you're trying to make them out to be saying. Right. And that's why it's like, if you just read Hebrews plainly, like straight through, especially chapters 9 and 10, if you read Romans, especially like, chapter 7 to like chapter 11, right? I mean, it's just, I think these things are very, very plainly said. I mean, especially Romans 9. I mean, I don't know how anyone can read Romans 9 and A, not walk away a 5-point Calvinist, and then B, not walk away going, wow, okay, Paul's
we
made
just
it
became
very,
friends for
very...
life. I just want you to know that.
Well, when I read Romans 9 as that's a tangent, but when I had like never read Romans 9 the whole way through until I got into a debate with Calvinists online, because I was very anti-Calvinist, and then I read Romans 9 and went, huh. Okay. and then struggled with that for about 6 months, and then it's like what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist? About 6 months. About the same time between a anti-Calvinist and a Calvinist.
About 6 months, yeah.
About 6 months. So, but yeah, I mean, other point to Romans 9, just to close that thread, is he says that righteousness is not obtained through ethnicity anymore, and it actually never was. Yes, that not all are Israel who are of Israel. And he just walks through Abraham and then Jacob and Esau, and just like, and makes it abundantly clear. And passages like Galatians 3 and 4 back this up as well.
And that's where I wanted to go with both of you right now is, prior to all of this, if I said to you, Israel, to this if you will, this covenantal theological awakening, if I said to you, Israel, where would you have been initially? Just in a couple of sentences, Israel is who or what prior to
or now?
Previously.
Well, I don't know that I had thought about it that much, to be honest with you, but where I am now and looking back on it, I would say I'm thinking this is like what most people I hear say, Israel, at least this is God's chosen people. Right. This is an ethnic group that has been chosen by God, set out, and I couldn't even tell you, are they all saved? Are they all going to heaven? I didn't understand my Bible enough to make these connections. I want to make one quick point, and it relates to Calvinism and how I think this is helpful in thinking about Israel, because in Calvinism, when it talks about all, right, there are phrases in the Bible that said, until they all come to repentance, or, right. There's certain phraseologies that non-Calvinists use to show that Calvinism is false. And it generally involves an all this or that. So one of the phrases told to me, I guess, is, does all mean all without exception all the time?
Well, I always eat at Taco Bell, so yes.
Well, but so I apply that also, the same thinking, to the terms Israel or Jacob, or anything that can refer to Israel. And so, does the term Israel always refer to an ethnic Israel, or is it a spiritual Israel, or is it this is a group of people? And I'll be accused of being a replacement theologist. I'm not replacing anything. I'm saying God's kingdom has evolved. Like, it's not just, the covenants and the law and all this stuff was brought through Israel. And then Christ is now the fulfillment of Israel. And then God's people are those not only of the original branch, but also those that have been grafted in. So this does involve the church, but this is the true Israel of God, all the people that will be saved under the new covenant.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Galatians 4. So Jacob, prior to your 6-month struggle with Calvinist, where would you have been in that when someone mentioned Israel to you? Would you have been kind of that same place, like, I don't really know for sure, or it's definitely this geopolitical place and it's all Jews, and therefore there's a special,
I knew that people
set aside for them.
Yeah, I knew that were Christians who said that the scriptures teach that Israel is now the church, but I definitely, because of my upbringing, kind of held. I wouldn't say I was like a strong dispensationalist, but I kind of held to kind of like a dual covenant mindset, and so I kind of struggled with this idea of the church being Israel, and then reading again passages like Romans 9 kind of helped to shatter that mindset. I mean, I actually pulled it up here. I mean, it says, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. After he says that not who are descended from Israel belong to Israel, because Abraham had two offspring, right? But only one of them, is the one through which the nation of Israel comes from. And then he says in verse 8, this means that it is not the children of the flesh that are the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as offspring. And so, I mean, you read stuff like that in conjunction with these other passages we've been bringing up, and then looking at what the new covenant had always been foretold to be. I mean, you were mentioning earlier, Kevin, in Hebrews, the passage about being given a new heart and having the law written on our hearts. That these are allusions. These aren't just like the author of Hebrews, whoever it is, didn't just
Paul.
I'm just saying we don't know, but no one knows. Paul. I've always thought it was Paul, but I mean, he's
Kevin's
not just like
Kevin's like, I don't know.
Not Paul.
He's not, or it could have been because Paul didn't always write his own stuff. He had people write for him, so it could have been Paul through someone else. But we're opening up so many. I love that you guys know all these things, because usually if I try going off on these tangents, I just get a lot of blank stares. Like, what's 1689? What's that mean?
I haven't seen that movie.
Yeah, right.
It's the prequel to 1917.
Oh gosh. But yeah, Hebrews in that section there is quoting Ezekiel, is quoting Jeremiah. It's quoting all, and so if you go back and look at what the Old Testament, foretells the new covenant to be,
right.
It was not just like, oh, and then there will be another attempt to make a kingdom of Israel that through nationalistic means, brings peace to the whole earth. It's just, and again, that cuts again, I think, to the heart of the gospel. And what did Jesus come to do? Jesus came not to establish another political kingdom. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. Well, if we believe that, Jesus is king, that Christ is Lord, and that's what Christ means, right? Christ is a messianic title, which bears kingship status. That's how Mark begins, right? The beginning of Mark is Jesus coming and saying, "Prepare yourselves, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." So, and so we have to believe that as Christians. And so we can't be citizens of the kingdom of heaven and then be like, oh, but God really wants to bring another kingdom of Israel into existence, and that's how he's going to accomplish his plans. That confuses the narrative
Yes.
to a point where it just becomes an incomprehensible jumbled mess. And honestly, I know a lot of people who grew up in this who lost their faith, and I can kind of see why, because they were not, to me, actually taught the gospel message. They were taught some obscure eschatological like off branch of Christianity that wasn't even invented until the last 200 years.
Yep. And I'm going to just go ahead. I don't know if Tomsky is still in the audience, but he is my follower from England. And so we're just going to go ahead and just lay all the blame right on Great Britain, because that's where this all came from. So Tomsky, I don't blame you for being the token atheist, because you guys have problems. But I think this brings us to the place where we really can start to talk about the current events. Even though we've been talking at it, now we can really start to begin to talk about the current events. And when you think about it, here you have a couple of Gentiles sitting down, talking with a person who has a Jewish, a Hebrew lineage, who are all kind of on the same side of this topic. And we look at what's going on. We look at October 7th and all the preceding dates. And if there are people out there who really want to understand the history of this, a really great place to turn would be to a podcast series called Martyr Made. And
Yes.
Martyr Made has an entire series on this, referred to as Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem. And I cannot, and I'll try and put the link to that in the show notes. You have to listen to this to really begin to understand this from the geopolitical perspective. He does not approach it from a spiritual perspective. He approaches it from a geopolitical perspective. And what's so imperative? Oh, we lost Kevin. Oh, Kevin's back. We'll add him back in. Oh, hey, you guys changed positions.
Sorry about that.
It's replacement theology at work right now.
It's right there. That's the yes. When you begin to look at this, there are so many things at play. And the preponderance of what's at play, in my perspective, is American evangelical dispensationalism that drives the importance of geopolitical Israel as being spiritual Israel. And anything that Israel does perspective, that I have a friend that I talk to on a daily basis who is an atheist, who has flat out told me, Israel's absolutely right, and whatever they need to do, they need to do. And what floors me, and so here's where we're all going to end up getting labeled, is this perspective that, well, Israel has an entitlement, and this is coming from an atheistic person. Israel has an entitlement to that land because it's always been their land, and the Palestinians are not even a people. No one, their own Arab people don't want them, and that's why they're stuck in this place. And when I look at it and I go, the entire reason for geopolitical Israel is that this is not my personal view. I need people to understand this because this is such a touchy subject. When you look at world events, especially according to Martyr Made, no one wanted the Jewish people either. That's not me condoning that. But you took this two groups of people that no one wanted anything to do with, allegedly, and you thrust them into each other's sphere of influence. You're going to have conflict. And I'm really narrowing it down to a 25-hour podcast into a very narrow window. You're going to have problems. And the Americans rush in at the end of World War II, for the formation of the UN. 1948 come along and say, oh, by the way, now we're going to recognize geopolitical Israel, and American dispensationalists were all on board with that, because that in their mind was where we're going to get the temple rebuilt. We're going to see a mass revival of Judaism, and everything's going to be right with the world because we're going to usher in the return of the secret return of Jesus at some point. And Kevin, you made a reference to the rapture, and that leads us to where we are now, which is Israel can do nothing wrong because Israel is our chosen people of God. And do either one of you see geopolitical Israel as even a spiritual issue, or is it strictly, as I keep saying, geopolitical philosophy? And are they playing off of the American or even the Western mindset of dispensationalism? Either one of you, go ahead and go.
Yeah, well, I think it's only a spiritual issue as a consequence of people who have wrongfully made it one. But it's not natively of its own accord. The modern state of that's known as Israel bears no biblical or spiritual connection to the Israel of the Old Testament, other than some shared geography. And taking that namesake. Interestingly enough, by the way, there has always been a large contingent within Judaism who object to, maybe not Zionism per se, but have objected to the nation state of Israel. It's one thing to say people go back to this region and live there if you want. That's fine. But a large contingent of the Jewish population, not only for maybe humanitarian reasons objected, but also for their own religious reasons. They believe that the nation state of Israel would only be reinstated by the Jewish Messiah that they still believe is to come, and that it has to be established as in the same way as the Old Testament monarchy existed in antiquity. So I mean, add that wrinkle as far as you want to the geopolitical or the religious side. But yeah, I mean the development of the modern political state. I mean the history takes a long time to go over. The podcast you mentioned, I think the guy's name was Daryl Brooks. I think is very, very highly recommended. Scott Horton plugged that on my show last week as well. Yeah, there's so much that goes into it, and again, we can blame the British for this largely as well, although America came in and got involved as later on too. But yeah, there's a lot of the history that people like to whitewash, and certainly, listen, it's not as though the Muslim Arabs are completely innocent through this entire time period. I don't think anyone suggests that, but it's like for every instance where someone like Ben Shapiro will bring up like some violence against Israeli settlements in like the 1930s and maybe in the early 1940s before the creation of the state of Israel, he'll completely ignore instances like radical anti-Zionists going around and in the 20s and 30s and committing acts of violence against Arab settlements.
I think you meant radical Zionist, not anti-Zionist.
Or radical Zionist. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Kevin, what's your response when you hear the word Zionist or Zionism? Does that almost make you cringe because you're afraid to speak out against it, or do you have kind of a natural disposition towards saying, "Oh, well, what's wrong with Zionism"? Is it where are you at? And I ask that because I think you're in kind of a different place than maybe where Jacob and I would be because of your. I think this is a positive for you. You don't have quite the same public persona as someone like Jacob or I would have having a regular show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't encounter it a whole lot. So, I mean, I see stuff on Facebook that I could comment, but I usually just scroll on past because it's just not worth
discretion being the better part of valor.
Right. Right. So, I mean, Israel is just a secular nation. I mean, that's really all it is. I mean, it's like there's certainly plenty of religion there. I mean, I went there once for a visit and a tour. It was it's a pretty beautiful, it's an amazingly beautiful country, just incredible beauty there. People were very friendly to tourists. So we enjoyed that part of it. In terms of being like, I don't know. I don't really, I don't know how to rightly say it. I'm not, if somebody appreciates Israel, wants the best for the people, wants to see ethnic Jews come to salvation, to come and worship the true Messiah that has already come. That's great. I mean, and then, I even know people that are, they want to practice these religious Jewish, what do you call them? Like the stuff that goes along with Judaism.
The rites.
The feasts and stuff. There's a lot of growing like Christian appreciation for like Jewish feasts and things like that.
Yeah, if you want to do that, that's fine. If they have Jewish heritage,
Torah
right?
Christianity,
yeah. I don't think it's necessary, but yet
there's beauty. There's beauty if you've never had the
much.
opportunity to sit down with friends and family and actually do an actual Seder dinner. I would strongly recommend that you do it, because an understanding, and I don't want to get too deep into theological weeds on this particular aspect, but there's some beauty in it. And I think even, our secular or atheistic friends can understand so much about the world, and especially the Hebraic or Judaism type view of the world when you look at things like Seder dinners or the Passover. But what I'm seeing, from my perspective, is that there again, even like a lot of atheists in the United States are inculcated with this dispensational mindset that Israel is incredibly important on the world scene. And I think they're far more influenced by dispensational theology than they even understand, because it's driven home to them every day. And I made a point to someone. I have a friend here in Minnesota who's an elected representative, who during the entire Ukraine situation, which, by the way, isn't it funny that Ukraine is now falling out of favor and now we're talking about peace deals in Ukraine, even though we're still talking about sending them money with our new Speaker of the House But when you look at how this plays out, the influence on American politics in particular has Israel at the forefront. And even people who would not even consider themselves Christian have that same allegiance to Israel that dispensational Christianity does have. And I think that leads the U.S. especially, but by default any Western nation, down a path, kind of a primrose path of self-subjugation to whatever the agenda might be as it regards getting behind Israel and saying, look, they have a right to exist and they have a right to self-defense, which no one, like there again, I'm libertarian in my philosophy. You do have a right to self-defense. If somebody comes in and hurts you in your home, hurts you in your place, you should be able to go after them. However, I also practice just war, and that's what I was telling this friend. I'm like, I don't know that you understand. You had nothing to say about Ukraine as a representative in Minnesota. Nothing, because that's a federal issue. But the minute Israel gets hit, you have come out and said the United States needs to, fund Israel and do all of these things. That's the danger of Darbyite dispensationalism on the world, that everybody's reaction is, oh, it's Israel, it's got to be okay. And therefore, any response that they have, no matter how overboard it goes, is okay because it's Israel, because they have a right to defend themselves. And then when you point out, well, they're killing children, to the tune of like 5,000 plus now, children and infants. They brought it on themselves because they support Hamas. And I'm like, these kids didn't even get a vote. Well, yeah, but it's Israel, and you're not allowed to critique.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you guys are having that same, and Jacob, maybe you can speak to this as a person of, Hebraic descent. Do you find yourself struggling a little bit with offering that critique, or you're kind of like, no, all the gloves are off, or you don't care what? Like, I can because I am Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not fully Jewish, so I can't necessarily play that card, but the gloves are definitely off. I mean, you said earlier, Israel has a right to self-defense, and of course we believe in the right to self-defense, and it's like, yeah, sure, the people living in Israel have a right to self-defense. The people living in the Gaza Strip also have a right to self-defense. The people living in the West Bank have a right to self-defense. That is a universal right. It doesn't, respect nation borders or national identities, and a corollary to you have a right to self-defense is that actions have consequences. And although I would never justify the loss of innocent life that Hamas committed,
Correct.
it is it is an obvious consequence of Israeli treatment of the Palestinians and of the American foreign policy that has enabled it. It is 100% blowback, and I mean, how many times can we say Ron Paul was right, and when will we learn? But
how many times can we say Pat Buchanan was right? By the way,
well, yeah.
I mean, if anybody hasn't had, if you haven't had
before
the chance,
my time,
that was yeah, that's not before Kevin and I. But thanks for making us feel old there. But Pat Buchanan called this in 2009, I think it was. And he said, where are we going to be in 17 years when these young men who have watched their sisters and family members in Gaza, mowed down?
Yeah.
And there again, that doesn't justify the slaughtering of innocent life, but especially go ahead, Jake.
Well, to me, this is exactly what Jesus is talking about on the Sermon on the Mount, and then what Paul echoes later in Romans 12. We cannot overcome evil with evil. Right, and this is a cycle of violence begetting violence. It is they have killed innocent people on our side, so we have to do whatever it takes, including killing innocent people on their side, which then just, as you just said, like what Pat Buchanan and others have pointed out, it's like, okay, you commit these acts of violence on these populations, people watch their siblings, their parents, their children get blown up. Like, you don't think that in the next 5 to 10 or 20 years, that doesn't make the people living there more likely to want to, support or themselves engage in terrorism? And so that cycle just repeats itself. I love when people, whether it's with Hamas or with Russia, will say, well, there's one person or one group that can end the war right now, right? With Russia and Ukraine, it's like Putin can end the war today if he wants to. And we hear the same thing with what's going on in Israel. It's, Hamas, if they wanted to end the war, they could end it. It's like, you know what? Israel can end this war too. It's pretty simple. It's, hey, we are now one state, and the people living in Palestine, in Gaza, have equal rights as
they are Israelis.
Citizens.
Yep.
And if anyone commits violence, we're going to prosecute them as domestic terrorists and handle that like, any Western government should. They don't always do that. I mean, I guess you have some instances of American domestic policy going a little bit too far. But still, even as bad as American domestic policy is, you don't see, the feds just carpet bombing entire city blocks to go after.
Be careful what you say.
Yeah, this might not age well.
Kevin, and I know you well enough. You and I have conversations on a very regular basis. This is the first time Jacob and I have ever talked, but like voice wise, but I know that there's part of you or I'm relatively certain in saying this, that there's part of you that is kind of recoiling from critique, because you still have your fingers in that community with friends that you communicate with probably on a little bit more of a regular basis that are more in the dispensational camp, that are more Israel are God's chosen people. And so it probably, and I don't know, but you said you have kind of scrolled past some of those conversations. Do you find yourself shying away from wanting to talk about, and let's just, I'm going to say it, I'm not speaking for anybody else here, that this opinion is my opinion. I believe that some of what Israel is doing right now is just patently evil. And we can, when you point that out, they go, yeah, well, this is all Hamas's fault. Do you find yourself being a little bit, and I want to say timid, that's not probably the right word, but maybe more guarded in some of these conversations because you do know how entrenched dispensational thought, Darbyite thought is in the modern Western church?
Timid might even be a good word. I don't know.
I don't know if that's a fair word to describe you. I've seen
Well,
you come alive lately.
yeah. I mean, I figure it's maybe the way I view it is I don't think this is worth the argument. And it's just like, because I don't think I'm going to convince people. And I think that is so entrenched in evangelical thought. Like, Israel should be significant for us as a democratic nation, right? Because they're a democratic society more so than
I think Jacob and I would argue with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean,
compared to what? I mean, like compared to Saudi Arabia? I mean, sure, but
yeah, I suppose you're right, and maybe that's just some of my evangelical thinking. I don't know. Where is the significance for the United States to have Israel as an ally? Maybe that's just the better question to ask. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I really don't know. I'm not a politician, and I don't want to be one. But from the evangelical side of things, there's no doubt that the confusion is there because I don't think they fully understand how the Bible is laying that out, like we discussed earlier. That there's like this significance of Israel as God's people that left a long time ago. I mean, 2,000 years ago, like when the Lord says, I'm going to the Gentiles, we're taking this to the Gentiles. I mean, it was kind of like, this is the end of it here. And then Paul reinforced that when he did the exact same thing. So I don't know. It can all get very confusing, but I scroll on by because I'm not necessarily like concerned about keeping a friendship or something like that.
No,
that's not really the issue.
It's a hard conversation though.
I don't know that I'm going to convince anybody ultimately, because this thought process is so entrenched in people. It's very difficult to win that argument.
No, I appreciate your transparency there, and that's one of the reasons why I asked if you wanted to sit in on this conversation, because I think you bring a perspective to this where, I would say that, there again, not necessarily speaking for Jacob, but I think he and I are pretty well, kind of like, I don't necessarily care if I change your mind, but you're wrong. And to me, that's kind of where I'm at, because I feel like some of these people do need to be called out and they do need to be questioned. And I do ask that, I do look at it and I go, okay, so you and I are connected with a group of people, some of those strings are stretched further than they ever were in the past, but we also have friends that are still in certain aspects of the community where they're out there defending Israel. because Israel is moral, and the Palestinians especially are immoral because Hamas is immoral and wicked and evil, and they killed innocents. And a lot of those same people that are defending Israel now in the actions that they're taking, professing to be Christians and saying Israel is this, God's chosen people. When I ask this question is, well, okay, if Hamas did was evil and the people of Palestine deserve the retribution that Israel is raining down, like literally raining down on them, then does the United States not also deserve that same retribution for what we do to preborn children?
I mean,
And
not even just that. I mean, that's one thing, but I feel like people could wiggle out of that by saying, well, that's the doctors doing that and the government just allows it. I mean, let's talk about
but I
the
voted
argument.
for them, right? Because
Right, you're true.
because
yeah.
because they're elected, so therefore because they're elected, I'm responsible, which is the argument that everybody's making for
True.
Hamas.
No, I guess that is a valid point. And another one you can say is, what about the actions of American foreign policy abroad, right? Like, I mean, what about all the drone strikes that Obama did in Syria? What about
Trump?
Yeah, or Trump? I mean, all of them,
Yeah.
but the ones that Obama did were especially bad and covered up. What about us arming the Saudis to commit genocide in Yemen?
Yep.
What about Iraq War II? What about what happened after Iraq War I, where we basically, initiated a blockade in Iraq that led to the deaths of, I mean, there's conflicting reports. Some people, the common claim is
We
it's
brought about our own
500,000.
Holodomor there.
Yeah, I mean, the point is hundreds of thousands died in Iraq because of our blockades. And we can just keep going back, right? Every decade, I'm sure I'm leaving things out that I don't even remember. And that's the problem, is that I've probably, people like Scott Horton, who know this stuff well, have probably forgotten more about the atrocities of American foreign policy than I even currently know, because there's just so much to look at. And so, should we engage in this collective mindset punishment, especially as Christians, and say an entire group of people are culpable for what their government does? And that's
Right.
if we're even being charitable to call Hamas like a government. I think if you look at the elections in 2006 and really study that, this was not exactly. Listen, I mean, I was kind of like, rolling my eyes a little bit when and no offense to Kevin, when he kind of said Israel is kind of more of a Western democracy, and I was like, yeah, well, but you know what? Israel is closer to that by miles than what we would, if we
Right.
did an analysis of the Gaza Strip and the elections that happened there. I mean, for one, what country in the world hasn't held elections since 2006? Let's start there. That's a little bit suspicious, right? Two, Hamas didn't even get a majority in that election. They got like 30-some percent, and it took, long story short, basically like a coalition slash coup with the American and Israelis interfering, and they went up against Fatah. And then, long story short, they ended up in power there, but it wasn't exactly like it was completely legitimate, and there's been no referendum since then. And then we're going to say, nope, that's legitimate, and that's so legitimate that 20 years later, everyone there is guilty by association.
Yeah. And there again, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have Kevin on. I asked him last week, and then we had to reschedule, and so I took the week off because I had to prepare for Rechtenwald. But I wanted you two to be able to sit down and talk about this, because I knew that you guys would have a mutually beneficial view, but at the same time a slightly different view, and definitely a far more tempered view, because I have said some things over the last month that a lot of people just don't like, and I've kind of told them where they could put it. But
well, and to speak to what Kevin was saying earlier about like not changing people's minds, I mean, I get that, and I would certainly never say that we are called to pick every battle, but I also don't think that we should pick no battles. I think that, I mean, even if we were just going to think about like a basic sales strategy, I think like sales conversion.
Now you're talking Kevin's language.
Yeah, I mean, basic sales, basic sales idea is like, convert 1 out of every 100 or 10 out of every 1,000 or something like that. So like, are you going to change every person's mind? No, but first of all, there's what we can measure, and I would say that the idea that if you over the course of a month or a year, speak to hundreds of people, that you're changing no one's mind. Even if you don't change their mind completely, you might shift them a little bit, and that's measurable. Then there's the unseen of like people who are reading the comment section and not commenting themselves, right. And we have no idea the impact that has on people, and thus no idea the impact that we have on the Overton window. And so if there's enough of us out there who are willing to speak the truth, even when it's unpopular, not only do I believe that will have an effect, I believe it already is. I think that if you just look on social media, if you look at even the mainstream media right now, people can tell that this is different. And you can tell from the rhetoric of people like Ben Shapiro, the rhetoric from people like Lindsey Graham, the rhetoric from people like Nikki Haley, that they are angry that they have to come on, this is it's war. We just get what we want.
It's Israel.
Right, it's Israel. Like, why aren't you guys on board? Come on, give Israel whatever they want. They know that they don't have the hegemony that they once had globally, and they're starting to realize they don't have that even at home, that they're starting to lose the dominant grip over the people, because more and more people are being woken. And again, that doesn't mean we're going to maybe make everyone reformed, confessional, 5-point 1689 Calvinists. I mean, I love that. But we might even get people who are handful. Yeah, like there might be even people who are going to still hold on to that dispensationalist premillennial view, but we might be able to convince them, be like, all right, at the very least, listen, I argue this way with Dispies. If this is God's plan, it doesn't need America spending billions of dollars to make it happen.
Yeah, really.
Right?
Just so you know, if it is God's plan, America's going to end up on the wrong side of this at the end anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So, one of the things I wanted to point out in what you were saying, and to Kevin especially, is Kevin, having ministered alongside you on this, in front of an abortion mills, and ministered alongside you, at college campuses, preaching the gospel in the open air. I would actually venture a guess that your impact with your personality amongst Christians is actually going to be far more impactful. Your impact would be more impactful with other Christians because of how well respected you are, with how you measure yourself and how you approach things. And not to take away from Jacob's show and what he does, but definitely far more than me, because people expect me to be the firebrand. I mean, they always have, even prior to the inception of my channel. Like TC is the firebrand. He's the guy who comes out and kind of Paul Washers it, and it opens, paves the way for someone like you. And I would think, I'm venture a guess really, that your impact is going to be far more profound than, say, even someone who has a platform like Jacob or me, to be able to go in and have that conversation in a way that is going to change minds, winning hearts and minds and influencing people, as the old military psyops used to say. And so I would tell you, especially as things stretch out with the situation between Gaza and the Hamas, but really the Palestinian people, listen to that martyr made, because you got nothing but time to listen to a 25-hour podcast. You don't have a life. but listen to that. But even, point out to people like, okay, so you're siding with Israel on this. What about the Christians in Palestine that have lost? I mean, Justin Amash, who is, very much a libertarian politician, pointed out, and Jacob, you might be able to remember the name. It's and there again, people are going to get upset because I'm going to lump an Orthodox congregation into Christianity, and I know that that's not allowed within evangelicalism. Yeah. But here's an Orthodox church that's been there for several 2,000 years. And
Yeah, I
family.
forget the name, but I could look it up quick, I'm sure. But.
Here's this Orthodox church bombed by Israel. And then I want to say at least one Christian hospital bombed by Israel. So you're meaning to tell me, and this is why I think you can have this conversation in a way that I never could, because I'd lose my mind, that somehow Israel's justified in that because they're God's chosen people while they're killing your brothers and sisters in Christ?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good challenge, maybe. You know, because again, I'm not afraid to have those conversations.
Oh no, of course not. I know that.
I'm equipped to handle them. All that kind of stuff. You know, it hasn't, like, certain things rise as to our interest. And while
I'm drawn to conflict, that's okay. You can say it.
While to say that I'm not uninterested in it, of course. I mean, it's affecting everybody. It affects everything that's going on right now. I guess I confine myself to not a multi-fronted war, if you will. As you know, I've been engaged in my own private war for 5.5 years now on another topic of spiritual abuse and authoritarianism. So that's where I put the bulk of my free efforts into that. And I'm not very shy about it.
No.
And so, you know, those are kind of where I put my energies into right now and have been. And I don't see that coming to a close anytime too soon, because that's a battle that needs to be waged, and it needs to, because it really, it hurts a lot of people, and it hurts them right here in small towns and in evangelical churches.
Try that in a small town.
Yeah.
Sorry. You guys would make a great conversation on Jacob's show talking about some of that, because he covers some of that kind of stuff.
Well, it's
right up the alley for an anarcho Christian.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, TC, you know how much I've written about it, how much I've talked about it, how much I've done with it, and continue to do with it, and you know, and my main target is not very happy about it. You know, they don't appreciate what I'm doing. In fact, we got a message from a woman the other day, and someone said, "I see that you're friends with Kevin Yount on social media. I just want you to know what an evil man he is." And
I wish I had a dime for every time somebody said that about me. I'd be as rich as you, Kevin.
But you know, I say that to say
about me.
Yeah, you know, I say that to say, you know, we have the things that we really are passionate about, and that's what I'm passionate about, more so than, you know, than even this kind of stuff. And although I do like the topic and I do love the topic, it's
where do you, Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Where do you see this? Jacob kind of referenced a little bit of this, but we've all heard people coming out and saying, this is it. This is the end times. I mean, I keep seeing the people, you know, like, I'm not on Facebook anymore. There again, I just want to keep reminding people that wasn't by choice. I was permanently yeeted from Facebook.
Thank you for your service.
There's but even on the Twitter sphere, I'm seeing, you know, the people, you know, posting these things, especially from Matthew, you know, these events that are prophesied about AD 70, when Jesus is saying, you know, telling his listeners, you know, there's going to come a time and these things are going to happen. And everybody's like, see, this is an end time prophecy. I'm like, no, actually, that's AD 70. And boy, they're losing their minds when you point that out, you know. And or, you know, getting called a replacement theologian or a preterist. And I'm like, no, I'm just a partial preterist, folks. But but there's there's all of this stuff going on, And the concern that I have is a little bit of what Jacob said before, which is if Jesus doesn't like come back tomorrow in this weird kind of like half return, partial, secret return where he like comes back a little bit of the ways and he's like, dips his toe in the water and says, well, I'll take the rest, take some of you with me. I'm really concerned for not that we can affect it per se, but Kevin, are you concerned for what this is going to do to some of these people who have bought into some of this?
Like the
And
whole Harold Camping type thing?
not even that extreme, but just these people who have been raised in this and are being told sometimes by their pastors, the Haggies and stuff that are out there,
Yeah.
that like this is what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like Jesus is coming, and all of a sudden he doesn't, and things kind of blow over, or like, excuse the terminology, blow up,
Yeah.
and Jesus doesn't come back for these people. Do you see this as being more detrimental to the Christian cause, or is it just it's just part of
I
what
just think
Christianity is?
it's cyclical. I mean, every generation has their times when there's enough political things going on around the world that it causes this sort of a reaction. And I don't think we can change it because, Darbyism is here. It's pretty entrenched in the evangelical framework. So, it's going to be what it's going to be. They're just going to be wrong, like so many have been wrong before. And, I don't know. I mean, I'll just say it if I'm going to offend people because I'm already probably offending people. But, man, the rapture is like the goofiest theological system. The gymnastics on an exegetical level.
You just need to read Daniel, brother. Just read Daniel.
Yeah, I know that it takes to get there is just so bizarre.
7 weeks, 7 years, which is 70 years.
Yeah. And the whole, the quotation from, I think it's 1 Thessalonians 4, perhaps, on, the return of in the twinkling of an eye, and, this stuff. It's just like, well, how do you make
like
that
QAnon.
a rapture?
It's QAnon theology is what it is.
It's pretty bizarre to me, and I've been intending to write a paper on it, but I just haven't gotten there yet. It is such proof texting, showing texts that support your position. That's not wrong, right? I mean, that's part of exegeting the scriptures, but just to pull these little things out and say this means this and this means this is what I see in all of that. And I don't really think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, sometimes I'm really jealous of the early church. Like in the first 400 or 500 years of the church, because you were saying like, well, people are going to believe these wrong things. There's nothing we could do about it. Well, back then they did stuff about it. They actually defeated a lot of heresies, and you don't hear about them anymore. There's
sometimes they punched heretics right in the face.
Right. I mean, no one
sign me up.
People don't talk about the Gnostics anymore. They don't talk about the Arianism. They don't talk about although some people I think some people say Mormonism is like modern day Arianism or something like that.
I would say Arianism is alive and well in Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Islam. They're all Arian.
We ran into a modalist the other day, Kevin. I had to share that tweet with you.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that half the evangelical church are accidentally modalists because they just don't understand what the Trinity is.
Mm-hmm.
Explain the Trinity to me. They're like, oh, no, that's modalism.
It's like an egg. It's an egg. It's like, no, it's water. No, Kevin, how many times have we had that conversation on the streets with people?
Mm-hmm.
As you look around at this, how much do you find news, either one of you, both of you, when you look at the news and you think about how much emphasis is being put on supporting Israel, and you had made the reference earlier about whether or not they were an ally. I think that was you, Kevin, that had said that. I'm like, go back to 1967 and ask the guys on the USS Liberty about how they feel about our allies.
Shout out to my boy Reed Coverdale. I love he always comes up with these funny, super funny tweets that did you? I can't think of them off the top of my head, but it's always it includes like the USS Liberty, but it's like a joke. Like, and just like make something bizarre up. Be like, did you know that Israel once did blah 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 blah? Like, Google, Israel USS Liberty to find out more. And
I would just say, just watch my interview with the survivors from the USS Liberty,
Yeah.
and get there. Yeah, listen. But thanks for stealing my thunder, Jacob. Shout out to your boy Reed. When you look around and you think about, and that was all tongue in cheek, by the way.
it's all good.
When you look at what's happening and the emphasis on, there being an ally, and we, the U.S., we needing to have this strong foothold there. The thing that I really wish, and Kevin, I know this will speak to your heart because you've been there, what that entire region needs is sound theology, a strong actual Christian presence. And, are you hearing anybody talk about that right now? Is
like going there to evangelize?
Going there to evangelize or whatever. And Jacob, I know that you bring the gospel up and for some strange reason in your shows. I don't understand why. But do you hear anybody talking about the need for that in this area?
I mean, I think there's a few, but not. It's pretty light, I mean, ultimately, like, it's when this all boils down to something. So my wife and I went to the movie Killers of the Flower Moon yesterday.
That sounds really good, by the
way. It was one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. It's long. It's over 3.5 hours, but it's really well drawn out. But this was done in the 1920s, right? And it's a true story. I don't know. I mean, they said that they really tried to, be true to the story. Okay. So whatever, I'm sure it was pretty close. But my wife and I walked out of the theater last night and we said, not a whole lot has changed in human nature. Like greed, desire for power, and control over people are the primary ingredients that cause these problems. Well, didn't James write about that? Where do these wars and these quarrels come from among you? They come from your desires for your own selfishness. And that's exactly what is happening in this movie. They're trying to steal these oil rights from these Osage Indian people. And what it leads to is murders and all kinds of crazy stuff. And
sounds just like the podcast I've been referencing.
What is any different today?
Right.
What is different from what we're talking about? You're talking about conflicting worldviews.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about, the pagan, secular, however we want to define it, the worldview of let's get as much as we can and get ahead. And then you're talking about a Christian worldview where the answer to all the problems is the gospel of Christ.
Amen.
Like Jesus saves, right? He saves us from the sins that will condemn us, and he actually saves us from ourselves so that we can desire peace and prosperity for all people. We don't have to try to gain advantage. Now, we're still sinful people, justified sinner and saint at the same time, and we still continue in sin, but our desires should be different. And so it all boils really down to that simplistic of a take on the whole thing in my mind.
I don't think that's simplistic. I think it's beautiful if it is in its simplicity. It's beautiful in its simplicity. Jacob, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I know that you can handle it with a platform of your size and the viewership and listenership that you get. And you've had some pretty radical guests of your own on. Here we go, strap in, and then we'll get ready to wrap up because the firebrands might start coming. When you hear your fellow Christians in the U.S., and I'm going to just go with that, let's just say fellow Christians without my own personal commentary on some of what I've been seeing over the last few weeks. When you hear your fellow Christians refer to Israel and the Jewish people of, geopolitical Israel talk about how, we all worship the same God. What's your initial response? Do we worship the same God, or do Muslims and Jews the Jewish, Israelis have more in common with each other than they do with Christians of today?
Jews and Muslims have a lot in common, and that's not to say there's nothing in common between those two in Christianity, because there is, but there are two differences that are important, and that ultimately would lead me to say it's not the same God that they worship. First, these are both important. I could lead with either of them, but the first I'll lead with is the God of Islam and the God of Judaism. Is not a triune God, and we as Christians believe in a triune God. I guess it's kind of understandable the Jews don't, although there are, people act like it's like there was no hint of this in the Old Testament. It's like, have you read Genesis 1? Like, let us create man in our image. It's like, who is our? Like, are we just made in the image of angels? Like that okay. Like, are we just, anyway? And there's
I've
more
been
than
told
just
that.
I've been told that too, but there's so many other instances of, foreshadows of the idea that God is, one God, but multiple persons, and so that, although that was more clearly laid out in the New Testament, that it's not completely foreign to the Old Testament. But then I guess the second thing that makes it different is that Judaism and Islam say the problem of man is that we are fallen. We've fallen away from God and are stuck in sin and disobedience. The solution in both is just to obey, to follow the law.
Right.
The solution in Christianity is the gospel, is we cannot follow the law. We try. The entire tale of Israel is God chose a specific people, made covenant with them, exhaust so much effort trying to get them to follow his law and to love him and to worship him alone, and they fail time and time again. They fail in the desert when he rescues them. They fail when they finally reach the promised land and they're living with judges. Then they ask for a king. They get a king. They continue to fail. And then the true solution comes when Jesus starts his ministry and says the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and it's no longer about you trying to obtain righteousness through obedience to the law or through belonging to some special ethnicity. It is about obtaining righteousness through grace by faith. And so that is the God of the scriptures. So if you're worshiping a God who doesn't tell you the way to obtain righteousness is through grace by faith, then it's hard for me to say it's the same God, ultimately, at the end of the day, even though I understand it as a shared history and shared scripture. But, at this point, there's only one gospel. I mean, this is the book of Galatians right here. There is only one gospel that can save. And if you don't worship, and if you're seeking any other gospel, any other salvation, it'll ultimately fail, and so it cannot be of the same God.
And it's the same gospel from the proto-evangelion of Genesis chapter 3 until today.
Exactly. The woman will have an offspring that crushes the head of the serpent. I mean, it's from the very beginning. It was clear that the point of what God was doing was working out redemption, was working out salvation. That
pointing towards Christ and the church.
Always pointing towards Christ. Always.
Well, Galatians 3 has been a repeating theme, and
I knew you were looking something up. I could tell by the way you were looking up.
Well, I mean, it just so happened that the church, the pastor yesterday just literally preached on this, and it is the curse of the law, and that everyone is cursed that does not follow every bit of the law, and Christ became a curse for us. He followed the law. He was actually guiltless, but he became a curse for us that he might become our righteousness. So the exchanging our sin for his righteousness. So the Galatians has been a constant theme in our discussion tonight.
Yeah,
relating
and
to
in the power of all this is, and here's TC doing his thing as I look, and the reason why I'm so angry at people who profess to be Christian, especially about all of this, is I don't believe that one person shuffles off this mortal coil, to quote the Bard, without, when they die in their sin, they die in their own just condemnation. I have no argument, with that. But what I'm seeing from people today is a celebration of Israel's power to do what it's doing. And we're not thinking, one, like at all. We just are dismissive about the Christians who are dying in Gaza. We're dismissive about the children that are dying. And what I'm not hearing from the church is an outcrying of sorrow over the souls of these people.
Yep.
And a recognition that what's happening here is because of an evil intent of the heart to have our own way. And, Kevin, you had mentioned this, and Jacob, you had made reference to this as well. And I'm over here going, I hate what's happening. I hate what Hamas did to Israel, not because Israel's our ally, but because what they did was terribly evil to do to innocent people. It's terrible to do it to anybody, but what they did to these innocent men, women, and children, parents, people who are at a party, that's evil. But it's equally evil to turn around and then exact that exact revenge on someone else because of what they did to you, and to dismiss, especially Christians, to dismiss the entire just war theory of the response to be equitable and in keeping with restraint.
Yep.
And to claim things like, oh, we have the moral high ground, or we are morally right, and then to be able to do this, and therefore it makes it okay.
Yep.
Like, what about these innocent, in as much as anyone is innocent? What do you say to these people whose children are just destroyed without ever having had the opportunity to hear the gospel that you claim you believe?
Right. It does tremendous harm to the gospel and to our witness. And a passage that came to mind, and this is probably my favorite passage in the entire Bible, is the passage of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. And Jesus says, he separates all people of the nations, the sheep and the goats, and the ones on his right, he says, "Come, you are blessed, take your inheritance. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat, and I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me." And then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." And then people stop there and forget the second part of that passage, which is that those who didn't do any of those things, you didn't do it unto me. And he tells them to depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And I'm like, you know what? If what we do to the least of these we have done unto our Lord, well, then this nation, the people in our government, need to get down on their knees right now and repent. Because what we're doing to the least of these is starving them, oppressing them, keeping them in essential slavery and in prison, and if that isn't enough, then oftentimes we're dropping bombs on their heads and blowing them to bits.
And I was just going to add, and then I'll turn it, to Kevin for final thoughts and Jacob for final thoughts. Every single, and I don't care who this hurts or upsets or makes angry. I don't care how many subscribers I lose. For those of you that profess to be Christian in the United States or in the Western world today, but especially here in the U.S., with the billions of dollars that we just agreed to send on top of the $3 billion annually that we send to Israel for their defense. We call it defense, especially since October 7th. Every bomb that has been dropped on every refugee camp, on white phosphorus to bunker busters, on every refugee camp, on every church, on every mosque, on every hospital, on every parking lot, on every little neighborhood, every bomb, I'm going to keep saying every bomb that has been dropped, every bullet that has been fired is being dropped and fired. And printed on the side of it, it says, with the permission of the American church. With glee. Because that's what I've heard.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And that's why it's one of my top. It is my top issue. I mean, people. It's like if I could press a button right now, and it's like as much as there's other issues we care about
Sure.
as Christian libertarians, right? Like we care about healthcare, we care about welfare, we care about the economy. If I could press a button right now and we had universal healthcare, universal basic income, and every other leftist policy in the book, right? Whatever. I don't want any of my money to go towards that either. But if I had a choice and I could say, put it all towards there, but not a single dollar more towards war, not a single dollar more towards, families being blown up. I bring this up a lot. The Libertarian Party New Hampshire made a tweet a year ago mocking Meghan McCain, with a picture of Meghan McCain grieving over her father, John McCain, after he passed. And listen, that's not maybe the type of message I would put on my Twitter, right? But the response by so many people, because that went super viral, was, oh man, how could you be so callous to a daughter grieving over the death of her father? And I just go, that is the point. That is the entire point, is that John McCain and Michael Bolton and the Republican Party, the neocon establishment, they conspired with Democrats too. They conspired. The entire, Washington, D.C. and the military-industrial complex,
Yes.
they conspired to wage American imperial, an advancement of American imperialism and American interests in the form of bombs and bullets and blockades in the Middle East for the last, 70-some-odd years this has been going on. How many children have cried over not even the bodies of their parents, just the blown up bits of their parents? Yeah. How many parents have grieved over their children dying in their hands,
vaporized,
having nothing to do? Just and this is something I talk about, and I don't seek to offend, but I know that in my quest to wake people up about this will offend them. But it's like, you know what? This is the most important issue that is going on in the world today. And I think anyone that has a heart for Christ, who sees this, who gets woken up to the true horror that war is, and the true horror of the fact that that Christ's name is attached to this. We want to talk about not taking the name of our Lord in vain. It should be the first duty of every born-again Christian to at the very least, we might not have the power to stop it, but we do have the voice to disassociate ourselves with it, to distance ourselves from it, and to stop supporting it. And I think that is what Christ is calling the American church to do today.
Kevin, I know that we've been on the same page with this, so you've got a big day tomorrow. You got to get up in the morning and go pick up keys, because you're going to go preach at a church on Sunday, and you need keys to get in, because you can't have the preacher, not get into the church. But and then you're showing up on Noggin Notes with another Christian friend of ours, mine in particular, that you just met, Jake Whiskerchin. So, but you have your own website where you do your own writing about your experience. You want to tell everybody where they can find you and
Yeah, I've been writing on uncommonfaith.org. It's my personal blog that I've just been on there since 2012. So what is that? 10 years or something like that? 11 years.
Almost 12, sir.
Yes, sir.
You're the math guy in the room.
Right. Depends on when I started. I post my meandering thoughts. I post theological papers, sermons. If I preach, put them there. But my main focus, again, recently, over the last 5 years, has been to expose spiritual abuse, because I think, where the church is wrong in the things that we've been talking about tonight, and I agree with you, Jacob, you said that very well. The church is very wrong when it abuses its own people.
Yeah.
And then we have to examine whether those men leading these churches are falling in the category of like an Ezekiel 34, where they're the shepherds that God just despises because all they're doing is they're feeding themselves. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important for me to talk about those things, to write about those things, and in particular to expose a church that we were involved with for a long time because of specifically the damage done to us and my family and my wife and my children.
And the damage we just did to another family very recently.
Yes, very unbelievable.
Very severe, yeah.
The most grotesque thing you could even imagine. And it, because it's an oppressive society. And so that's my passion, if you will. But I'm I really like, maybe I need to shift some focus here. And and it doesn't mean that I can't be dual pronged on that. I can't do two things at once, but with other things going on, I'll just have to weigh out my time. But yes.
So one more time, the
uncommonfaith.org is where
we keep losing you, Kevin. So it's that fancy house of yours. You're in that weird room. Yeah. So Kevin, I really appreciate you taking part in the conversation. Jacob, I mean, obviously you have your @Biblical Anarchy on there, but where can people find you, and when can we get you on for an episode of Libertarian Lowdown to actually talk about something besides the atrocities in Israel and Gaza?
Yeah, just send me an invite. I'll check my schedule. So people can follow me obviously on social media, X or Twitter. I like the dead name Twitter.
You rebel.
So to speak. Yeah. @Biblical Anarchy. If you want to find the podcast, you can go to biblicalanarchypodcast.com or just look up Biblical Anarchy Podcast wherever you watch podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, things like that. And yeah, thanks for having me on, TC. It was a lot of fun. And
I hope it lived up to your expectations. I know that we really,
No, this was good, and I enjoyed talking and meeting you, Kevin, and talking with you as well. And listen, I just want to make it clear, I don't want to undermine at all your passion to expose and speak out against corruption and abuse in the church. That is a very important topic as well. Anything that brings harm to to the Lord, that harms His reputation. These are things that I think we as Christians have to speak out about, expose, and try to bring godly correction to. So I commend you for your efforts.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Well, gentlemen, I will let you guys, go. I think Jacob's probably got to he probably has an actual job, so he probably needs to get to bed at some point.
Yeah, it's getting a little late.
It's a little late for you, but
A little long in the tooth.
no, that's Kevin. That's Kevin. But you guys take off, and I'll close us out, and I will obviously, Kevin. I'll be waiting to hear how you do with Jake, and Jacob. I will definitely be in touch to get you on for an episode of Libertarian Lowdown. Thank you for your time, both of you tonight, brothers. Appreciate it.
Yep,
God bless
thank
you guys. See you later.
Folks, I've been talking about Israel. I've been talking about Gaza, the Palestinians, Hamas. I've been talking about this stuff ever since October 7th. I'm not going to let it go until this is done. And I'm not going to let it go until Christians start to change their mind. It's not Christian to support Israel. It's just not. It's not the Christian position to support Israel. It's not the Christian position to support Hamas. The Christian position on this, the humanitarian position on this, is to stand up for the innocents on both sides of this, the Palestinian innocents and the Israeli innocents. And until people are able to see that, I'm just going to keep speaking. I don't care who it offends. It's just the way it is. It's the way it has to be. So, and I'll reiterate it. Every bomb that Israel drops, every bullet that it fires, is done with the word stamped on the side of each one of those rounds of ammunition, done with permission and the glee of the Western and American Christian Church. And then you wonder why you have a hard time convincing your atheistic friends that your faith is worth following. Because I don't think it is, at least the way you represent it.
We are go for liftoff in T-minus 30. Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. Secondary guidance systems engaged. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark. All systems are a go. All systems are a go. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at